So, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our today's webinar about Azure Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery. On behalf of Itenetics Switzerland and Microsoft, we would like to welcome you to this online event packed with information and details about this interesting Azure cloud services. My name is Charbel Nemnom. I am cloud architect at Itenetics. Joining me today as a moderator in this webinar, Elena Placido, Cloud Solution Architect from Microsoft Ireland. We will be accompanying you for the next 60 minutes, and we will introduce you to the Azure Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery world. So some housekeeping before we start. So the webinar language will be in English with subtitles and also being recorded. You will receive the recording together with the information showing in the next 24 hours by email. If you have any questions, please use the chat window in this Team session. We will try to answer all your questions during the webinar. If not, the answer will be sent to you together with the recording. Also, as we all know, we are working also from home, so there may be some home background noise. And now let's start the webinar. The agenda for today, we will start first by introducing why business continuity and disaster recovery, BCDR, is such an important topic. Then we will discuss all the available Microsoft solutions to address BCDR use cases. We will also share our customer story that is leveraging Azure services for their business continuity and disaster recovery strategy. Then we will show you two demos on how Azure Migrate, Azure Backup, and Azure Site Recovery can help you in your business continuity and disaster recovery plan. And finally, we end up by talking about our solution and call to action. And now I will hand over to my co-moderator, Elena Placido. Please, Elena.
Thank you, Charbel, and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Why we are talking about business continuity and disaster recovery today. Customers come to us to discuss those topics because of impacts of an outage to the business, to the day-to-day business processes, to the brand, and to the information technology processes. Another big security threats that we have today is ransomware. Ransomware is going on encrypting data and asking organizations to pay money. And sometimes our customers think that they have a backup solution in place, but ransomware attacks can target also the backup servers. And this is why it is important to think and plan to have a backup solution that can mitigate the risk that comes with the ransomware. Then this is an important scenario when we are considering to plan a business continuity and disaster recovery solution. Another aspect of the disaster recovery is compliance, is disaster recovery for compliance. Now in Azure, in the Azure infrastructure, we make sure we can offer a wide range of support for compliance certifications for our infrastructure itself, but at the same time, we want to help organizations to stay compliant as enterprises may have the need to obtain or maintain some certifications, and we want to make sure that the disaster recovery checklist can be achieved and maintained in the easiest and best way possible. And now, when we think about really reliability of systems, we need to understand that reliability is really what we have in mind, but it is not possible to avoid change and to completely avoid failure, as avoiding failure is not a reasonable goal. So what we want to do is to plan to respond to failure gracefully, and this would be the how, and this would be making our systems resilient. The ability to respond gratefully and to make how we can make our systems resilient will be the topic of the next session and the next slides that we will be discussing, how we can actually make our systems more resilient. First, in Azure, when we look at the Azure infrastructure, we start from the foundation. The resilient foundation is what Microsoft is building and how Microsoft is managing the infrastructure and how Microsoft is communicating with the customers. Building reliable system, we say, is a shared responsibility, as security in the cloud is a shared responsibility for this reason, because we start from a resilient foundation, and then we look at what are the resilient services that are built by Microsoft but operated by customers. And although they're not mandatory, they're built into the platform so that our customer workloads that need high availability, backup, and disaster recovery can get started quickly. And on the top of that, we do have the applications that can be built with and enriched with those services. And these services are really trying to achieve resiliency in the sense of the ability of a system to recover from failure and continue to function. We don't want to avoid failure at all costs, but enabling how to respond to failure in a way that avoids downtime or data loss. And the goal of resiliency is to return the application to a fully functional state following a failure. And we take into consideration here three important aspects of resiliency that are high availability, disaster recovery, and backup. With high availability, we consider the ability of the application to continue running in a healthy state without significant downtime. And by healthy state, we mean that the application is responsive and users can connect to the application and interact with it. Then disaster recovery is the ability to recover from a rare but major incident, as for example, a wide-scale failure or a service disruption that can affect an entire region. And one way to think about high availability versus disaster recovery is that disaster recovery starts when the impact of a fault exceeds the ability of the high available design to handle this fault. And when we design resiliency, we must understand our availability requirements. For example, how much downtime is acceptable. And this is partly a function of cost. How much will potential downtime cost your business? How much should you invest in making the application high available? And we also have to define what it means for the application to be available. For example, is the application down if a customer can submit an order, but the system cannot process it within the normal time frame. And then data backup. And this is a critical part of resiliency, as if a stateless component of an application fails, we can always redeploy, but then if data is lost, the system cannot return to a stable state. And so data must be backed up, ideally in a different region in the case of a region-wide disaster. We make a difference between backup and data replication, where with data replication, we are copying data in real time so that the system can fail over quickly to a replica. And we have support for this, for example, in databases as a SQL Server that can support the SQL servers always on availability group. And data replication can indeed reduce how long it takes to recover from an outage, ensuring that a replica of the data is always standing by. However, data replication will not protect against human error. If data gets corrupted because of human error, then the corrupted data just gets copied to the replicas. And therefore, it is important to include a long-term backup in a resiliency strategy. I would like to discuss how Azure can be resilient as a platform. So what you see here on this slide are availability sets that are in our data centers that are able to protect from hardware failure in a data center. Let's say a failure of a rack, for example. And then we do have the support for availability zones. Those are area in a region, in a specific region, and then you are protected against the loss of an entire data center. Those data centers, as you see here on these slides, are separated in those zones, and each zone features independent network, cooling, and power. And if we look at a high availability at a higher level, and at the same time the need to maintain data residency, we can look at region pairs, and this is the ability to achieve protection for the data and the application from the loss of an entire region, for example, with the geo-redundant storage or with Azure Site Recovery. That is a solution that we will discuss now to look at what are actually the resiliency features that we can enable on our cloud services. And here we look at a scenario. What you see here is an example of a high available application that is based on a multi-tier architecture. So imagine we have a backend with a database, and then processing tier, and then a web tier. And this application needs high availability. This is why we have deployed this application in different availability zones within a region to protect from data center, regional, and failure. Because we need also this disaster recovery to be planned to meet compliance. We want for this application to be able to failover, to be available even in the case of a regional disaster. And here we can enable Azure Site Recovery that has the ability to replicate the virtual machines to another region that is in the same geographic cluster, and in this way we can maintain the data residency at the same time achieve this resiliency for our application. From a database side, we are replicating data from the primary region to another region, and I will say something more about Azure Site Recovery to explain how it works, what are the advantages. So in here, Azure Site Recovery is a disaster recovery solution that allows you to put in place disaster recovery plans without the need to have a disaster recovery infrastructure. As you see here on this slide, we do have a primary region that is, in this case, for example, North Europe, and what we are doing with Azure Site Recovery is replicating to a secondary region that could be West Europe. And the interesting part is the ability to build recovery plans. If you have dependencies between your applications, you can put in place manual gate, for example, when you are failing over. And in this case, we have the example of Azure virtual machines, but Azure Site Recovery has the ability to support also disaster recovery for systems that are implemented on-premise. For example, in this case, we see that Azure Site Recovery can orchestrate and replicate infrastructure that is deployed on premise on a VMware, for example, on a Hyper-V, and we have support for Windows, Linux, and really also in this case, we enable customers to protect, replicate, to monitor the replication, and to carry out also drills for the failover. What we want to achieve is to support customers that can have heterogeneous environment where you will have maybe some applications in the cloud, some on premise, and you would have different systems. Now, we will see this then later on also with Charbel in a demo, but before leaving the stage to Charbel, I would like to say some words on Azure Migrate. And the reason why we are talking about Azure Migrate is because this solution that is indeed that has been designed for migration under the hood is using the same technology of Azure Site Recovery. What it enables Azure Migrate is to do an assessment of of infrastructure that is deployed on premise. Those assessments can be performance based, so can help you to assess the real sizing of a VM that is deployed on Azure on the base of the performance, and so you can optimize the cost, and then you can use Azure Migrate also to actually replicate and migrate the infrastructure on Azure. Also, in this case, the environments that are supported are quite heterogeneous, as we support migrations for services that are hosted on VMware, Hyper-V, and we do have support for a monitoring of the whole progress of the whole project. So we support really enterprise scenarios where we can also integrate with other tools that can be a better choice, for example, for specialized workloads. And with that, I will leave the stage to Charbel for a demo.
Thank you, Elena. Appreciate it. So now let's see the migration of Windows Server and SQL Server to Azure in action. So now here I have logged into our portal.azure.com and start by entering the Azure Migrate from the Azure search bar, which will bring you to this screen. Then you want to go to the right and start a new Migrate project. You will see here that the subscription I chose Azure Migrate Demo subscription, or you have the choice of others. And you will see that the Migrate project is a Fabricam demo. Then I will go ahead, click here to create a new project. Now that you come to the wizard tool, you will see that the subscription and the resource group remain the same. Then you give the migration project a name and select the geographic location for it, which is Switzerland in this case. Now, recently, Switzerland has been added to the list, and this is only the location where Azure Migrate will use the track progress of migration across heterogeneous environments, such as Elena mentioned, the VMware, Hyper-V, or physical server. This is not where the server or the database will be migrated to. So this is location only used to store discovery, assessment, and migration-related metadata. Now, in the next tab, you will be able to select your assessment tool. You have a variety of options. The Azure option for assessment is free, of course, although you have other options depending where your workload resides, whether it is another public cloud or if you have a legacy application that need to be migrated. Two great options here to migrate legacy application, including current tech and Unify Cloud. On the next tab, you can select the migration tool. Again, the Azure Migrate is free, while the other may charge you. We can view detailed pricing by simply clicking on the link, and this will provide you more information. Finally, you have the chance to review and add tools. So this is the first step of the process. You will see that upon onboarding that subscription, there are over 55,940 servers, discovered servers. If you want to learn more, you can simply click on that, and it will bring you to a new tab. On this tab, you will see what applications have been discovered, dependencies, the number of cores, memory, disks, storage, and operating systems. I will go to Demo Appliance 1 for deeper dive. Here, the application discovered, I can see that I have 126 applications on the server, giving me a comprehensive inventory of what will be migrated over. I can also view the dependencies. This is a particularly interesting feature as you can map from one server to the next and you can see the different connection point. So I will give just a second to load as it's looking at the entire system. And now you will see all different ports and you will have visibility of each one in detail. You can expand to see the description and the machines included. Now I will go to the assessment tab. This is perhaps one of the most valuable assets that Microsoft added to Azure Migrate. You will see that based on this assessment, there is a variety of resources that have different status, whether it is ready, outdated, the location, sizing criteria, discovery source, and the confidence rating of whether this will be a smooth migration or not. You can go here to learn more. Upon clicking on this, you will see that 8 servers are ready to be migrated over, and you have a monthly cost estimate broken out by compute and storage. You can go to edit properties to create more comprehensive estimate of what your migration might cost based off your individual needs. You can choose different VM size criteria, performance days or on-premises. We can choose performance history, percentile utilization, the VM series, the comfort factor. You can also change the pricing option depending on if you have an enterprise agreement in place or something else that may change your pricing. Once you got back to assessment, you will have an idea of what can be migrated. You will see I have over 35,930 servers are ready for migration. So let's go ahead now and see the replication feature. Here you will see a variety of criteria to see if you can replicate over to Azure. I would choose yes for VMware vSphere. Then you want to select the appliance which was deployed as part of the assessment on premises. I will pick demo appliance 1. And then I will select yes to apply and import migration setting from an assessment. And I will give you an option to select a group and select the assessment that you want. So yeah, I will select a group, demo appliance 1, and the second assessment. From here, you can select individual virtual machine to replicate to Azure. I will just choose a few here. So as part of this process, you need to choose your target settings where the virtual machine will migrate to. Here again, I will select the resource group that I want, the virtual network, the subnet, and then I will select that I have an eligible Windows Server license. This is to optimize the cost. Next, I will choose my compute settings. Here, you configure your compute setting based on the VM size that you will need. This allows for further customization. Take your time to load. And finally, you have the option when you select disk to choose your proper disk, and then all you have to do is review and start replication to Azure. So this is as simple as that. Now, the final option that I want to share here is about test migrated servers. Or you can simply migrate them automatically, or once you get this into the stage into process. You can click in more for details at any point of the process, and you can choose the different settings, or you can clean up the test migration before doing so. Going back to the admin Azure Migrate dashboard, you will also have the option for SQL databases. You will see that you can assess and migrate your on-premises databases to Azure SQL database managed instance or Azure SQL database. So going to databases, you will see the screen is very much the same as before. What you need to do is select your subscription and your migration project. I'll click OK, and you will see here populate on the screen, and you see that you have Azure SQL databases and Azure SQL VMs, and you will see which server is ready to be migrated over. And that's how easy it is to migrate Windows Server and SQL Server to Azure, so to improve the speed and agility to your business continuity plan. So now I will discuss our recent customer case deployment that they adopted the business continuity services and recovery from Microsoft. This was based actually for a big Swiss sport organization here in Switzerland. They use Azure Site Recovery and Backup as a secondary backup site. The first major concept for this customer was resiliency. As Elena mentioned before about resiliency, their concept was to have the systems and processes were implemented with sufficient redundancy and capacity to mitigate most type of threats and issues without affecting the users of the systems. The second major concept was the ability to recover from outages or system corruption. So in this case, Data Protection Manager, DPM, for short-term retention on premises and Azure Backup for long-term retention were used to restore systems to a recent point. This was clearly defined together with the management as to what level of data loss are willing to assume in the case of a failure or outage. And in most instances, services can be restored quickly and within the same environment. And the last major concept was for this deployment, disaster recovery, where a catastrophic loss from a natural disaster, man-made attack, fire, or other such major incident occurs. In this case, recovering from the widespread loss within an acceptable time was not feasible. In such scenario, Azure Site Recovery Services was used as a secondary DR site in Azure, where data and services can be recovered and returned to operational status within an acceptable time frame. These efforts are to be considered a last resort to be used for a catastrophic outage, because the time, money, and the resources required to make such switch and to return to normal services down the road can be very substantial. This particular use case included a couple of workloads supporting their public-facing website for their sport business and the backing central SQL database. Moreover, the aspect of missing network equipment after failover to take over web publishing from Azure was also addressed by automating the deployment of Azure Application Gateway, Network Load Balancer, and VPN Gateway via JSON ARM templates, which was orchestrated by using a recovery plan. A recovery plan capability is part in Azure Site Recovery will help to orchestrate the recovery order of the multi-tiered application during failover, since there are many components dependent on each other, such as the front-end web server and the back-end SQL database. So multiple recovery plans were set up in this case as a failover process in Azure Site Recovery, which was used step by step during a disaster scenario. And to ensure that the replicated VMs are attached to the correct network subnet in this event of a failure, the local network were associated in Azure after the first successful replication. Now I'll hand over to Elena to discuss the compute backup resiliency options that we have with Azure.
Thank you, Charbel. Backup is an important component of resiliency, as it is one of the optional features that you can enable to make your VMs, in this case, more resilient. We see here on this slide an example of a backup service in action for an Azure virtual machine. Azure virtual machines are one of the systems that are supported by Azure Backup, but we support also backup for systems that are deployed on-premise. So for Azure virtual machines, we do have the enabling of the Azure Backup service directly in the Azure VM blade, and the idea is that when you initiate a backup at the first time, there is actually an extension that is deployed on the VM, so we don't need actually an agent, and then the backups are transferred to a vault in Azure. We do support also application aware snapshot, and the idea is that you can build your backup policy with the RT recovery time objective and recovery point objective according to your needs. And one important option that we support for backups is the possibility to support also backup of the SAP HANA databases. And what are the advantages? The advantages of doing those backups in Azure virtual machines is to achieve a recovery point objective of 15 minutes. So you can recover critical data of up to 15 minutes. And then we do support also one-click point in time restores. So you can restore production data to alternate HANA servers. This is now available, and you can also chain backups and catalogs to perform restores that are all managed by Azure behind the scenes. Another advantage is the long-term retention, as you may have compliance and audit needs that are rigorous, and then you may need to retain your backup for years. And this is based on the retention duration, beyond which the recovery points will be pruned automatically by the built-in lifecycle management capability. Now, the backup management in Azure is available in the portal, and also we do have support for the command line interface, so the Azure CLI. And now with this, I will leave to Charbel for a demo of backup and Azure Site Recovery.
Thank you, Elena. So now also another demo covering the Azure Backup Service to replicate also between different regions. This will lower your recovery time objective and recovery point objective. So now back to our portal .azure.com. First off, I'm going to show you how easy it is and simple to back up in Azure VM. First, we'll go to the Recovery Services Vault and then select Backup. I will select Azure as the workload that I'm running, and I will say that I want to back up a virtual machine. Next, I will click to configure the backup. Here, I will choose the trial VM backup policy. Although I have a choice of two different policies, you will see that within this policy, the backup frequency is daily at 11 a.m. I have the instant restore capability of snapshot for every 2 days. I can go back to the retention of a daily backup point for 10 days in the past. And I can look at the retention of weekly backup points going back 12 weeks. Here, I will add a virtual machine from the virtual machine that I want to back up. And once that virtual machine is added as a resource that I would like to back up, I can also select to back up the OS disk only. Then all I have to do is click Enable Backup, and there is in a few clicks, this VM will be backed up to Azure. Now next, I will show you how to back up a SQL server running in Azure VM. So in a similar process, within the same recovery services vault, I will go to backup. I will choose Azure as the workload I'm running. And here I will select SQL Server in Azure VM instead of normal virtual machine. And when you click on Start Discovery, you can select which SQL Server VM you want to register with Azure Backup. I have already done this step to speed up this process. Next, I will select View Details, and you will see it automatically discovered a few SQL servers that could be backed up. Here you will see the VMRG, the server, the backup readiness, and the details of that specific server. Next, I will go and configure a backup for that SQL server. So similar to backing up in Azure VM, I will have to add resources that I want to back up. I will click on Add Resources. You will see on this tab, I have the option of selecting an entire SQL server or in individual databases. And more importantly, I can turn on Auto Protect. And what this does is it will auto protect all the databases on a server that are currently there and any databases that I end up in the future. This is a super cool feature. So I'm going ahead and add that SQL server with Auto Protect turned to on. And then I will choose the appropriate backup policy for that SQL server. So I will choose the 2 hours backup policy, which is more stringent policy. You can see it will retain up to a backup point 180 days in the past, and it will be backed up every 2 hours. And all I have to do now is enable a backup, and that SQL Server will be backed up to Azure. Now, also, there is a few other features I would like to highlight here. I will go back to the same recovery services Vault dashboard, then I go to backup items. If I click on this tab, you will see that I have 5 SQL Server in Azure VM. If I open this up, you can see the backup status, whether it is a standalone SQL instance or if it is always on availability group. You can see if it's healthy or unhealthy. And simply enough, if I click on employees records, for example, I can see different restore points that I have available for a given SQL database. And you will see that I can restore to any of these points and simply by going and click on restore. This will give me the options where and how to restore by choosing the server, instance name, database name, whether I want to be restored to alternate location, overwrite the original database, or it's just simply enough restore as a files. So I will choose to restore to alternate location, and then I will select the desired restore point. I will select 29th. And then I will select advanced configuration and configure if I want to have the database in no recovery mode enabled or not. And then all I have to do now is click OK, and that SQL database will be restored. Now, in the last demo, I will show you now how easy it is to replicate between different Azure regions for disaster recovery. Here, I am in different recovery vault, which is deployed in West Europe. I will click on Enable Site Recovery and Enable Replication. First, I will choose my source location, where the primary VMs are located. So the source VMs are in North Europe in this case. I will choose the same subscription that I had before, as well as the same resource group where the VMs are deployed. And then I will click Next. Here I want to select, you can select which VMs you want to replicate for DR scenario. In this case, I will choose VM AZ Oracle Prod 01. And finally, on the last tab, I will be able to look through the different configuration settings that I have, whether it is the target resource group, the virtual network replica, and most importantly, the replication policy that you can set up to replicate between North Europe and West Europe. And I will validate all these policies are what I expect for this replication to take place. So all I have to do to finish this is to create the target resources and enable replication. And in just a few clicks, I will be able to replicate my VMs from North Europe to West Europe. And that's how easy it is to back up and replicate your Azure VMs or SQL servers in Azure for business continuity and disaster recovery scenario. Now, a quick about ITnetics and our offering for you today. As you're already familiar that ITnetics has been successfully active in the Swiss IT service market for over 10 years. Since 2018, we have been 100% subsidiary of the Swisscom group, but we are completely independent as a so-called Microsoft Cloud Boutique. So our dedicated focus is exclusively on Microsoft 365 and Azure services. A further mainstay is our support within the framework of user and business adoption with our transformation services. With around 60 employees in 3 locations, Zurich, Bern, and Lausanne, we support our customers on their journey to the cloud. So to this end, we have been awarded 10 gold and 2 silver competencies by Microsoft and have received numerous awards in the recent years. And we are also the only Swiss Microsoft Azure partner with the competencies Azure Windows Server and SQL Server Migration Advanced Specialization, which we completed with this distinction. We work in a structured manner and according to clear methodology in 4 so-called service model. With our advisory services, we create the necessary basis for decision-making and the understanding of why, how, and with what approach your journey to the cloud should be planned. With workshops solution assessment, or development of a decision matrix for a planned cloud migration, use cases are identified, sharpened, prioritized, calculated, and checked for their business value for feasibility. This provides you with a clear basis for making decisions for the next step, implementation. Our architects and specialists will support you in word and deed in the implementation of the identified use cases as various processes in operation and support change in the course of a journey to the cloud. So Itnetics Switzerland also offers corresponding operation support, whether it be with managed services for workplace or Azure cloud infrastructure, or as a contact point for support questions regarding these platforms. Here we see an enormous value for your IT organization, because your specialists have to take care of the exciting and interesting for the development of your business platform and not the monotonous operation of the infrastructure. So we take care of that for you. Based on today's webinar, our offering for the business continuity and disaster recovery solution assessment, data backup and disaster recovery are increasingly seen as complementary. They are not separate operations. Disaster recovery as a service has dramatically changed the economics of DR, making it affordable and cost-effective for nearly every organization. Moreover, by leveraging the cloud for backup and DR, you ensure the survival of the data in the event of a disaster and can quickly re-establish application services using on-demand infrastructure. In this context, we offer you a solution assessment within the scope of this webinar at a fixed price. The 9,500 Swiss franc can be covered by Microsoft solution assessment. Please follow up on this with us for more details. This provides you with a transparent basis for decision-making and argumentation as to why, how, and which use case Azure Backup and Azure Site Recovery can bring the greatest added value to your organization. So now more detail for your call to action and about Microsoft Solution Assessment from my co-moderator Elena. Please, Elena.
Thank you, Charbel. So from Microsoft side, our call to action is the solution assessment motion. From Microsoft, we support the solution assessment through partners, and those motion make available fundings through certified partners to help our customers who are looking at different scenarios in the cloud. It can be an infrastructure migration, it can be an application modernization, or really to look at how I can achieve a more modern workplace, looking at Teams assessment, or looking also at cybersecurity assessment is now a topic of interest. Those solution assessments are delivered by specialized partners in those areas. There is a kickoff with a discovery call and then a nomination, and after the nomination and the solution assessment has been approved by Microsoft, then the actual solution assessment is carried out. And the goal and objective of those assessments is to give to customers a roadmap with details around the different topics of how a migration and application could look like in the cloud, so that informed decisions can be taken. It is important to remember that there is no obligation at the end of the assessment to migrate to Azure or to adopt any of the solutions that are in the scope of the assessment. So for this, we are at the end of our webinar about business continuity and disaster recovery. And we hope that we have been able to bring these interesting Azure services a little closer to you. And I would like to thank you very much for your interest and attention. You can still write your questions in the chat window in the next few minutes, or send them to us by email to info@itnetics.ch, the email address that is also on this slide.
Thank you, Elena. Appreciated. Also, from my side, I would like to thank everyone who attended this webinar. We hope it was useful to you. We are here to support you in this journey. Business continuity and disaster recovery is very list up to 5 list of the topic of discussion in today's. So please don't hesitate to contact us. We will be also very much pleased to hear from you in our next webinar, which will be held on the topic of managing and responding to security events using cloud-native SIEM and SOAR solution. So the date for our next webinar will be on December 1st and 2nd from 3 to 4 p.m. Thank you very much again, and goodbye.